We will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars.
Everything you know about the space race might be incomplete. While the world celebrated Neil Armstrong's historic moon landing, classified documents suggest another mission was secretly taking shape in the shadows. Deep within government archives and whistleblower testimonies lies evidence that the United States and Soviet Union may have achieved something extraordinary together. Mars might have been humanity's best-kept secret during the 1970s. Let's get into the video to uncover what really happened during those missing years of space exploration. The space race nobody talks about. The 1960s and early 1970s were defined by one thing: the race to space. Everyone knows the story. Sputnik shocked the world, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, and Neil Armstrong planted the American flag on the lunar surface. But what happened after Apollo 11? The public narrative tells us that interest in space exploration simply faded away. Budget cuts, changing priorities, and a war in Vietnam supposedly shifted America's focus back to Earth. But that story never quite made sense.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
You've just accomplished one of humanity's greatest achievements, proved that interplanetary travel is possible, and demonstrated technological superiority over your greatest rival. Why would you just stop there? Why wouldn't you immediately start planning the next giant leap? The truth is, they didn't stop. While the public saw the end of the Apollo program, classified documents and whistleblower testimonies suggest something far more ambitious was happening behind closed doors.
Plan will be to keep the power down. They'll simply drift in flight until Friday morning.
The space race didn't end with the moon landing. It simply went underground. Both superpowers had the technology, the motivation, and most importantly, the secrecy apparatus to pull off something unprecedented. They had proven they could send humans to the moon and bring them back safely. Mars, while much farther away, wasn't impossible. It was just the next logical step. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Instead of competing against each other, some evidence suggests they decided to work together. The idea of US-Soviet cooperation during the height of the Cold War sounds impossible. These were two nations that came closer to nuclear war than most people realize. They were fighting proxy wars around the globe, racing to build bigger bombs and constantly spying on each other. The very thought that they might secretly collaborate on anything seems crazy. But space exploration was different. Both countries quickly realized that sending humans to Mars would require resources and technology that neither possessed alone. The distances were enormous. The risks were unprecedented. The costs were staggering. Even for superpowers, a Mars mission pushed the boundaries of what was technically and financially possible. So while their public rhetoric remained hostile, behind the scenes, a different conversation was taking place. Secret diplomatic channels that had been established during the Cuban Missile Crisis were reportedly used to explore an unprecedented partnership. The logic was simple. If they could combine American engineering expertise with Soviet heavy lift capabilities, they might actually pull off the impossible. Both nations understood that whoever controlled space would control the future of warfare, communication, and resource extraction. Mars represented the ultimate prize. A successful mission would prove technological superiority and open the door to interplanetary colonization. The question was whether they could trust each other enough to make it work. And according to some sources, they found a way. Project Red Sun. The alleged operation was called Project Red Sun, and it supposedly launched in complete secrecy on June 10, 1973. The mission remained hidden from the public, from most government officials, and even from the majority of NASA and Soviet space program personnel. Only a handful of people at the highest levels of both governments knew the truth. The crew consisted of 3 individuals whose backgrounds tell a fascinating story. Colonel Elliot McKay C. Jr. was listed as the mission commander, an experienced Apollo-era astronaut who had died in a plane crash in 1966. Or had he? Conspiracy theorists suggest his death was faked to allow him to join the classified program. Major William B. Rutledge was supposedly an Air Force officer with experience in secret space programs, and Vladimir Ilyushin was a Soviet test pilot who some claimed had actually been the first man in space before Yuri Gagarin, but his mission had been covered up due to technical problems. The spacecraft itself was called the ISV Columbus, an interplanetary vehicle that combined the best of both American and Soviet technology. It was built using modified Apollo command modules, Soviet life support systems, and a revolutionary propulsion system that could sustain a crew during the long journey to Mars. But the mission didn't launch from Kennedy Space Center or the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Instead, it allegedly took off from a secret facility deep in the Amazon rainforest, where no satellite surveillance was watching. After a 158-day journey through space, the crew reportedly achieved something extraordinary. They not only fly by Mars or orbit the planet, they actually landed on its surface. The proof for Project Red Sun began surfacing in the early 2000s, starting with a series of leaked photographs that appeared on obscure internet forums. These grainy, poorly scanned images showed astronauts in bulky spacesuits walking across a red, desert-like landscape. There were pictures of a habitat module partially buried in dust, a Mars rover parked in the distance, and what appeared to be scientific equipment scattered across the alien terrain. The images had that authentic vintage feel that made them seem legitimate. The suits looked right for the 1970s, the equipment matched the technology of the era, and the landscape was convincingly Martian. But when experts examined them more closely, problems began to emerge. The film quality didn't match what NASA was using for space missions in the 1970s. The agency employed high-quality 16mm cameras that produced crisp, stable footage even under difficult conditions. The Red Sun images, by contrast, looked deliberately degraded, as if someone was trying to mimic the appearance of vintage space photography without actually using the right equipment. Then came the testimonies. In 2011, an Italian journalist named Luca Scantamburlo held a press conference claiming to have uncovered definitive proof of the secret Mars mission. His source was an anonymous whistleblower with the codename Bravo X Sierra 24, who allegedly had access to classified NASA documents. According to these files, Project Red Sun was completely real. 3 astronauts had successfully landed on Mars in 1973, conducted experiments, and returned to Earth. All of it had been recorded but kept hidden from the public for reasons that were never fully explained. But the most compelling evidence was yet to come: video footage that supposedly showed the mission in action. The footage that shocked believers. The video that emerged was unlike anything people had seen before. It showed the view from a spacecraft window looking down at Mars, with grainy colors and the kind of degraded film quality that suggested it was genuine 1970s space footage. For believers, this was the smoking gun they had been waiting for. The footage showed the Columbus spacecraft approaching the red planet, its hull visible in the frame as Mars grew larger beneath them. Then came the landing sequence, with the crew reporting their successful touchdown on the Martian surface. The audio was muffled and full of static, but you could supposedly make out the voices of the astronauts as they described their historic achievement. But there was something else in the footage that made it truly extraordinary. Right after the landing, the external camera captured a blurred, indistinct shape moving across the Martian surface. It couldn't be explained as a dust storm or equipment malfunction. The object seemed to be moving with purpose, almost as if it was alive. Proponents of the Red Sun theory claimed this was exactly why the mission had been classified. The astronauts had found evidence of life, possibly even an entire underground civilization that had been hiding beneath the planet's surface for thousands of years. NASA, predictably, denied everything. They dismissed the photographs as crude fakes, the testimonies as fabrications, and the video footage as an internet hoax. But their denials only seemed to fuel more speculation. The problem was that people wanted to believe, and when you want to believe something badly enough, you can find evidence everywhere. Setting aside the compelling nature of the evidence, the practical challenges of a secret Mars mission in the 1970s were staggering. The technology existed to send humans to Mars, but the infrastructure required would have been enormous and impossible to hide. The Saturn V rocket, which was the only vehicle capable of launching humans into deep space, stood 363 feet tall and produced 7.6 million pounds of thrust. When it launched, it created a shockwave that could be felt for dozens of miles and was visible from hundreds of miles away. The Apollo missions were public spectacles watched by thousands of spectators and tracked by observatories around the world. Building a secret launch facility in the Amazon rainforest would have required years of construction, thousands of workers, and massive logistical support. The idea that such a facility could be built and operated without anyone noticing strains credibility to the breaking point. Then there's the question of the crew. Colonel Elliot C. Jr. did die in a plane crash in 1966, and his death was thoroughly investigated and documented. His funeral was attended by family, fellow astronauts, and NASA officials. If his death was faked, it would have required a conspiracy involving hundreds of people, from doctors to journalists to government officials. Vladimir Ilyushin was a real Soviet test pilot, but he remained an active public figure in the Soviet Union until well into the 2000s. If he had secretly traveled to Mars, survived the journey, and returned to Earth, it seems unlikely that he could have maintained a normal life and career without anyone noticing the long absence. The evidence for Project Red Sun was compelling, but it was also deeply flawed. And that's where the real story begins. The art of the hoax. What makes Project Red Sun fascinating is how effectively it captured people's imagination. The story had all the elements of a perfect conspiracy theory: secret government programs, missing astronauts, leaked documents, and mysterious footage. It fed on people's natural skepticism about official narratives and their desire to believe in hidden truths. The photographs that launched the Red Sun mythology were actually composite images created using existing NASA footage and Mars probe imagery. The shots of astronauts on the Martian surface were digitally manipulated versions of Apollo moon landing footage, with the lunar landscape replaced by images from various Mars missions. The habitat modules and equipment were borrowed from other space programs and superimposed onto Martian terrain. The video footage was even more sophisticated. It combined genuine spacecraft footage from the Apollo and shuttle programs with computer-generated imagery of Mars. The mysterious moving object on the Martian surface was lifted directly from a 1977 British television program called Alternative 3.
Meanwhile, in China and the Middle East, unparalleled earthquakes killed millions, far more than might have been expected from a nuclear attack.
Which was actually a mockumentary designed to parody conspiracy theories about secret space programs. The testimonies and leaked documents were equally fabricated. The Italian journalist Luca Scantamburlo was a real person, but his claims about classified NASA files were never substantiated. The anonymous whistleblower with the codename Bravo X Sierra 24 was a fictional character created to add credibility to the story. What makes this particularly interesting is how the hoax evolved over time. The Project Red Sun story gained traction because it tapped into several powerful psychological and cultural forces. First, it provided a satisfying explanation for the apparent end of the space race. Instead of accepting that budget cuts and changing priorities had derailed America's space program, people could believe that the most exciting missions had simply gone underground. Second, it offered the appealing fantasy of US-Soviet cooperation during the Cold War. Despite their public hostility, both nations had worked together on various scientific projects, including the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. The idea that they might have collaborated on an even more ambitious mission wasn't entirely unreasonable. Third, it fed into broader skepticism about government transparency during the 1970s. The Watergate scandal, the Pentagon Papers, and revelations about CIA activities had shattered public trust in official narratives. If the government was lying about Vietnam and domestic surveillance, why wouldn't they lie about space exploration? Finally, the story provided hope for those who felt that humanity's greatest achievements were behind us. Instead of accepting that the Apollo program represented the peak of human space exploration, people could believe that even more impressive missions had been carried out in secret. The psychological appeal was so strong that even when the evidence was debunked, many people continued to believe: the real secret space programs. While Project Red Sun was fictional, the 1970s were actually filled with legitimate secret space programs that remained classified for decades. The US Air Force operated the Manned Orbiting Laboratory program, which was designed to put military astronauts in space for reconnaissance missions. The Soviet Union had its own classified programs, including the Almaz space stations that were disguised as civilian research facilities. Both nations were also developing technologies that would later become crucial for interplanetary travel. NASA was working on nuclear propulsion systems that could dramatically reduce travel times to Mars. The Soviets were experimenting with closed-loop life support systems that could sustain crews during long-duration missions. These real programs were far more modest than a Mars landing, but they demonstrated that both superpowers were indeed pursuing space capabilities beyond what they revealed to the public. The existence of genuine secret programs made fictional ones like Project Red Sun seem more plausible. The irony is that the real space programs of the 1970s were actually quite impressive. NASA's Viking missions successfully landed robotic probes on Mars,
and the Viking mission that landed 2 craft on the surface in 1976.
and sent back detailed images of the planet's surface. The Soviet lunar program achieved multiple robotic sample returns from the Moon. Both nations were laying the groundwork for future human exploration, even if they weren't ready to send crews to Mars. Today, we're closer to sending humans to Mars than ever before. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the Moon as a stepping stone to Mars. Private companies like SpaceX are developing the heavy-lift rockets and life support systems that will make interplanetary travel possible. The European Space Agency, China, and India are all pursuing their own Mars exploration programs. The current Mars missions are providing unprecedented insights into the planet's history and potential for life. The Perseverance rover has found evidence of ancient water activity and is collecting samples that will eventually be returned to Earth. The Ingenuity helicopter has demonstrated that powered flight is possible in Mars's thin atmosphere. These real achievements are built on decades of careful scientific research and technological development. They represent the kind of patient, methodical approach that's actually required for interplanetary exploration. Unlike the fictional Project Red Sun, these missions are transparent, well-documented, and designed to advance human knowledge rather than serve political goals. The difference between fantasy and reality is that real space exploration is even more amazing than the conspiracy theories. The Project Red Sun story teaches us important lessons about how conspiracy theories develop and spread. It shows how sophisticated hoaxes can be created using existing technology, and how people's desire to believe can override their critical thinking skills. But it also reveals something deeper about human nature. We're drawn to stories about hidden truths and secret achievements because they make us feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves. The idea that extraordinary things are happening behind the scenes makes our ordinary lives feel more meaningful. The challenge is learning to distinguish between healthy skepticism and unfounded conspiracy theories. It's good to question official narratives and demand transparency from our institutions, but it's also important to base our beliefs on verifiable evidence rather than wishful thinking. The real story of Mars exploration is still being written. When humans finally do land on the red planet, it will be the culmination of decades of scientific research, technological innovation, and international cooperation. It will be humanity's greatest achievement, and it will happen in full view of the world. Mars remains one of the most fascinating destinations in our solar system. Recent discoveries have revealed that the planet once had flowing water, a thicker atmosphere, and conditions that might have supported life. We've found organic compounds in Martian soil and detected seasonal changes in atmospheric methane that suggest ongoing geological or biological activity. These discoveries were made through transparent, collaborative, international efforts. Multiple space agencies have contributed to our understanding of Mars, sharing data and resources in ways that would have been impossible during the Cold War. The real story of Mars exploration is one of scientific cooperation rather than secret competition. The technologies being developed for Mars missions are also advancing life on Earth. Research into closed-loop life support systems is helping us understand sustainable living. Studies of Mars's atmosphere are providing insights into climate change. The challenges of interplanetary travel are pushing the boundaries of materials, science, propulsion technology, and human endurance. When we finally do send humans to Mars, it will be because we've earned that achievement through careful preparation and international cooperation. It will be a moment of triumph for all humanity, not a secret victory for any one nation. The story of Project Red Sun reminds us that sometimes the most compelling narratives are the ones that never actually happened. While the secret Mars mission remains in the realm of fiction, the real achievements of space exploration continue to amaze and inspire. As we stand on the brink of actually sending humans to Mars, we can appreciate both the power of imagination and the importance of evidence-based thinking. What do you think drives our fascination with secret space programs? And how do we balance healthy skepticism with the need for verifiable facts? Share your thoughts in the comments below.